My name is Thorsten Overgaard. I'm a Danish photographer. I travel the world taking photographs and teaching photography. Today I'm going to tell you about Aperture. I use mainly Leica that have manual focus, and also the Aperture ring sits outside on the camera, so it's this one that I turn here. So what is Aperture? It is a way to increase the focus. It's also a way to change the exposure. If you look how the aperture looks inside the lens, it's very easy to see in this lens. This is an Oculus. So if we take a picture 0.95, it looks like this. And then we go 2.0, it looks like this. Then we go 5.6, it looks like this. And let's just go all the way to f16. And now everything is going to be in focus from front to back. So what happens is that in terms of light, then every time you turn it from, for example, 2 to 2.8, that's one stop. Each time you turn the aperture one stop, you reduce the light to half. And that's been used a lot to change the exposure. But basically, what aperture was made for in the beginning was that every time you go one stop, you increase the depth of field and the overall sharpness. So if you imagine you go 100 years back to lens design, then the more you close down the aperture, the sharper and more detailed the picture gets, because the optics wasn't that precise. Today, optics is really precise. It's down to very small tolerances. So even a lens like this, that is a 0.95 Oculus 50mm lens, will create sharp pictures wide open. It's very narrow sharpness, so it just have this much sharpness, but where it's sharp, it's really detailed, it's really high contrast, and it has correct colors all the picture. So in that way, you could say if you have this great lens design and this great lens quality, you don't need to change the aperture to increase the sharpness. That's what you used to do 100 years ago and even in the 70s. So in my philosophy on photography, I always shoot wide open because I want to have the depth of field, the dreamy look. For me, there's no point in having a 0.95 lens and then stopping down to 5.6. Then why would I have a big lens like this? I could just have a small and more economical lens. So I really want to use all my lenses wide open. And the thing that happened with the aperture was that in the 70s, we started to get light meters built into the cameras, and usually when you looked into the camera, you would see this arrow going up and down, and you would adjust the camera so you get the arrow in the middle. That would be the correct exposure. So the only way, or the most used way to do that, was that you changed the aperture till the arrow came down. But what you also did, you did get the right exposure, but what you also did is, like, whenever you change the aperture, you change the depth of field. So then suddenly you can't make dreamy pictures because now you stop it down to 5.6, so now everything is in focus from the front to way back, and that's not the same look. My opinion is that you only use aperture to change sharpness. You don't use it as a light control. Use other things for that, and I'll get into that in other videos. Also, if you talk to the lens designer who designed this lens and other Leica lenses, Peter Karpe, he says, never stop down a lens, always shoot it wide open. It doesn't mean that you cannot stop it down. It does have an aperture ring, so you can definitely work with it. But the intention of the design of the lens is that it's shot wide open because the lens is optimized to shoot high quality. When you change the aperture, you change the depth of field. Depth of field is simply just how much is in focus, not in the width, but in the depth. So you put your focus here, then how much is going to be in focus in front and on back of it. And that changes with the aperture. And you actually have a scale. Some lenses have the depth of field scale. It's those stripes here. The way it works is that if I, for example, set the lens to 2 meters here, then I can see at 0.95 is this line, and it's really narrow. Then if I change the aperture to 8 or 16, then the focus is going to be all the way over by this line, so that's almost 3 meters, and over by this line, and that's almost 1.5 meters. So that changes the depth of field a lot. The sharpness that it shows here is what is called acceptable sharpness. So it's going to be perceived as pretty sharp, but maybe if you zoom in, it's not, it might be a little bit different. And here, I'll show you some pictures here. If we go take a picture here at 0.95, this is how it looks. That's extreme. Then we go 2.0, that's a more normal lens. And then we go here 5.6. And then let's just go f16. That's the smallest hole we have, and then you can see everything is basically in focus. There's two more things to aperture or depth of field, how the aperture changes the depth of field. So one thing is that depth of field is actually the same for an f-stop no matter what the lens. But if you have a wide angle lens like this 35, you see a wider picture, so you're going to perceive that more of the picture is in focus. Whereas when you shoot with a 90mm like this, then you easily blow out the background, for example in a portrait. But if you took the 35mm picture and you cropped it in so you only saw the part of the picture that a 90mm would see, and you zoom in on that, you'll see that the depth of field is exactly the same at f2.0 on the 35 as on the 90. So that's how it actually works. It's almost like a mathematical calculation, the aperture and the depth of field. And that also means it doesn't change if this was a size lens, Leica lens, Leica lens. The depth of field at 5.6, 2.0 and so on is going to be exactly the same. Only how good is the lens designed to shoot wide open, for example, that's a thing that would change from one make-off lens to another one. That was my talk on aperture. If you want to dig deeper into aperture, you can pick up either my ebook, The Freedom of Photographic Expression, where I go through all the basics. If you're going to get even deeper into it, you can do my new extension course. And if you don't feel like buying one of my books today, it's totally all right. Also on my website, there's lots of free articles you can just dive into. And if you're really smart, you go to my website, sign up for my newsletter, and you get a free ebook, and you get notifications every time I make new articles and new content. Thank you for watching. See you next time.